and your appointment as Attorney General. Now, the foreign policy platform at the Republican National Convention undertook dramatic changes. Did you discuss changes to the Republican foreign policy platform with Mr. Flynn at any point during the campaign?
I don't recall it. I was not at the convention when the platform committee met.
You were the lead of the campaign, but you don't recall discussing it with him?
Well, that may be a bit of a stretch. I was asked to lead, inform, and find some people who would join and meet with Mr. Trump to give him advice and support regarding foreign policy, and I did so, although we were not a very effective group, really.
You met with Ambassador Kislyak in November of 2016. Did you discuss your meetings with Ambassador Kislyak with Mr. Flynn?
Did I discuss Mr. Flynn with him?
Did you discuss your meeting with the ambassador with Mr. Flynn?
The ambassador, I met with, I think, some 25 ambassadors that year. I did meet once in my office with Mr. Kislyak. And I do not recall and don't believe I communicated any of that information to Mr. Flynn.
Are you aware of any meetings between Ambassador Kislyak and Mr. Flynn that might have occurred around the time of your meeting with the ambassador?
I do not.
Okay. In her testimony before the Senate in May, former acting Attorney General Sally Yates testified that 1 week into the Trump administration, she notified the administration that Mr. Flynn had lied to Vice President Pence about discussing sanctions with Ambassador Kislyak. As part of the transition team and the president's pick for Attorney General, in January, were you notified when the administration was notified of Mr. Flynn's lie and his susceptibility to Russian blackmail?
I don't believe so.
All right. We now know that you were aware of the efforts of Carter Page and George Papadopoulos to meet and establish communications with the Russian government. Did you at any point—
Well, that's not necessarily so, about, at least from what Mr. Carter Page says, and I don't recall that.
All right. Did you at any point discuss with Michael Flynn the possibility of then-candidate Trump or his surrogates meeting with the Russian government?
I do not recall such a conversation.
Did you know that Flynn was working for the Turkish government while acting as a surrogate for the Trump campaign?
I don't believe I had information to that effect.
Did you know that he was working for the Turkish government at any point after the election?
I don't believe so.
Were you or anyone on the Trump campaign aware of Mr. Flynn's efforts to extradite Turkish cleric Gulen?
I've read that in the paper recently, but I don't recall ever being made aware of that before this recent release in the paper.
So you just read about it in the newspaper afterwards? After the inauguration, you did not know that the FBI was requested to conduct a new review of Turkey's 2016 extradition request for Mr. Gulen?
The FBI was—
Did you know about that?
I'm aware that the Turkish government continued to press the federal government with regard to seeking the return of Mr. Gulen to Turkey.
Did you know
and our department had a role to play in that, although I'm not at liberty to discuss the details of that.
Did you know that the Turkish government allegedly offered $15 million for Mr. Flynn to kidnap Mr. Gulen?
Absolutely not. You mean it? No.
Time of the gentlewoman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Sessions, for your testimony here today and your service to our country over the years that you have been front and center. And a number of things I wanted to discuss. Well, one of them is the DACA situation. And it seems, as I recall, that you had made a public statement some time back about the constitutionality of the policy that was implemented by President Obama. Would you care to reiterate that position today?
Well, the president, President Obama indicated multiple times that he felt that DACA, he didn't have the power to do DACA in the way it was done. And eventually, they must have changed their mind and executed this policy to take persons who are in the country unlawfully and to give them lawful status, work permits, and even participation in Social Security. So I felt for some time that was
a violation of the rule of law, and I appreciate your emphasis on rule of law in your testimony today, multiple times coming back to that point.
Mr. King, I would just say it is correct in my view, and I think you probably share it, that something is lost whenever you provide an amnesty. It's a price will be paid if that's done, but sometimes circumstances are such it may need to be done, but we need to be careful.
Thank you. And we've been made aware here in this committee that there's a significant backlog in immigration cases. Have you presented any request to Congress or a statement that could inform us as to how many resources you might need, how many judges you might need to get this backlog caught up, and then an idea how many we might need to maintain an anticipated level?
That's a very good question. Yes, we've worked on it. We have some preliminary information. We're seeking a total of about 360, 70 judges. We've added about 50 to the total. We've shortened the time process for selecting people, not shortening the training program, and we're adding judges. I would say on the backlog, it's gone up dramatically. It's now over 600,000. But the last 2 or 3 months, we're almost not adding to the backlog. And I'm told by the additional work we're doing by January, we will not be adding to the backlog, but hopefully reducing it. That would be a real change in the trends that we were heading on.
Well, thank you. Then I just ask you to reflect as this committee anticipates the potential of a special counsel to broaden this look that I think is forced upon us in a reluctant way, but I certainly support this special counsel to look back at some times here that I believe should be incorporated into this, and that is I look back at October 16th, 2015, when Barack Obama was speaking of Hillary Clinton and whether she might have violated any security clauses in our statute, in particular 18 U.S.C. 793, when he said that he had no impression that Mrs. Clinton had purposely tried to hide something or to squirrel away any information, made the point of intent. Behind that, in April after that, April 10th, a similar statement. She would never, meaning Hillary Clinton, she would never intentionally put America in any kind of jeopardy. Those words of intent caught my attention when I heard James Comey use that very word July 5th of 2016, and it seems as though he latched on to the statements made by President Obama, and they more or less implied and implemented it into an interpretation of the statute, that word intent, as if it were a condition before there could be any prosecution for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 793. And I don't know that I have a question on that. I want to make sure that I put that into the record so that it's under consideration by the DOJ.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
I thank you very much. Mr. General, do you believe in this book, the Constitution of the United States?
Yes.
And will abide by it with all of your intentions?
That's exactly correct.
I thank you so very much. I took the liberty of reviewing federal crimes against children, particularly those dealing with sexual or physical abuse. As you well know, Lee Kaufman, Wendy Miller, Debbie Watson Gibson, Gloria Thacker Deason, and Beverly Young Nelson, these young women have accused this individual, Judge Moore, who is running for a federal office, the United States Senate, of child sexual activity. Do you believe these young women?
I have no reason to doubt these young women.
And with that in mind, if you believe these young women, do you believe Judge Moore should be seated in the Senate if he wins? And would you introduce investigations by the DOJ regarding his actions?
We will evaluate every case as to whether or not it should be investigated. This kind of case would normally be a state case. I would say, Representative Jackson Lee, that the ethics people at the Department of Justice, and I've talked to them about that when this campaign started. It's the seat I used to hold. They advised me that the Attorney General should not be involved in this campaign. I have friends in the campaign.
Thank you, Mr. General. I
have steadfastly adhered.
I want to make sure that if he comes to the United States Senate,
and I think I should continue to do so.
If he comes to the United States Senate, that there would be the possibility of referring his case for at least a federal review by the Department of Justice.
We will do our duty.
Let me also refer you back to the meeting on March 31st, 2016 with Mr. Papadopoulos. You well know that Mr. Papadopoulos, in addition to his comments in the meeting regarding a meeting between Trump and Mr. Putin, had series of meetings dealing with, and as you can see, Trump, Mr. Papadopoulos, and you leading that committee. I cannot imagine your memory would fail you so much. But moving on, he was in that meeting, but you also had Stephen Miller, who is a senior policy advisor, who was noted in the stipulated statement of offense to receive conversations from Mr. Papadopoulos about his constant interaction with the Russians to intrude in the 2016 election. You continued in the October 18th meeting before the Judiciary Committee or hearing in the Senate to not answer the question. Now, in light of the facts that are now part of the record, do you wish to change your testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee on June 13, 2017, where you said, I have never met with or had any conversation with any Russians or any foreign officials? Let me jump to the final part.
Well, I
have no knowledge of any such conversations by anyone connected to the Trump campaign. Do you want to admit under oath that you did not tell the truth or misrepresented, or do you want to correct your testimony right now?
You're referring to my testimony at confirmation?
Before the Senate Intelligence Committee. My time is short, and I have 2 more questions, please.
Well, I'm not able to respond because I don't think I understand what you were saying.
I'm asking your Intelligence Committee testimony. Do you want to change it where you indicated you had no knowledge of involvement of the Trump individuals involved in conversations regarding the Trump campaign Russians? And Mr. Miller supported Mr. Trump's press conference where he said, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you'll be able to find the 30,000 emails. Do you want to change your testimony that was where you said, I have no knowledge of any such conversations by anyone connected to the Trump campaign regarding Russians involved in the campaign? That was a testimony on June 13.
I'm not able to understand.
All right, let me move forward to the
Let me say this, Mr. Chairman. Could I?
The black identity, let me move to a document that you have prepared. The gentleman keeps saying he cannot recall, so I'm reclaiming my time.
The gentleman will suspend. The witness wants to answer the question she asked.
And I should be given extra time, and I do not have extra time. Let me move to the black identity.
The gentleman will suspend.
I will suspend.
The witness will answer the question.
Yes or no? Does he want to change his testimony in the Intelligence Committee?
I would just say this. I stand by this testimony at the Intelligence Committee. I have never met with or had any conversation with any Russians or any foreign officials concerning any type of interference with the campaign or election in the United States. Further, I have no knowledge of any such conversations by anyone connected to the Trump campaign.
Thank you very much for that.
What I did say in my opening statement, I explained that when I was asked in October, just a few weeks ago, when I was asked about the matter, did I have any knowledge of anyone who had talked to the Russians, I indicated that I had not recalled that meeting when that occurred. But I would have been pleased to have responded and explained it if I'd recalled it. I've tried to be honest about that and give you my best response and did throughout all the testimony I've given. Ms. Lee.
You stand by your testimony. Thank you very much. Are you familiar with the names Eric Garner, Walter Scott, Tamir Rice? My question is, as I hold up the poster dealing with the report under your jurisdiction, Black Identity Extremists, it is interesting to me that you are opposing individuals who are opposing lethal force, similar to the attack on Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King on COINTELPRO, but there seems to be no report dealing with the Tiki Torch Parade in Charlottesville chanting, "Jews will not replace us." Why is there an attack on black activists versus any reports dealing with the alt-right and the white nationalists? Can you answer that question quickly?
I'm not aware.
Are you planning on investigating that?
When was that report completed?
In August of 2017.
I'm not aware of, I have not studied that report.
I ask you to because it's an attack on individuals who are simply trying to petition the government in a redress of grievances. Let me move to criminal justice reform. We have found that mandatory minimums and over-incarceration has been the history of criminal justice. We were moving toward criminal justice reform, which you opposed as the United States Senator, and now you intend to return toward discredited Nixon-era law and order criminal justice policies going to make America great or not, or waste precious taxpayer dollars. Do you have any interest in rehabilitating those incarcerated, recognizing that mandatory minimums created the opportunity for over-incarceration rather than telling your prosecutors to prosecute on every single crime? Is there any opportunity to work with your office to deal with progressive ways of dealing with criminal justice reform at this time? Yes or no?
Yes.
Right?
I would just respond and say that Senator Durbin and I worked together to reduce the crack cocaine penalties some years ago. It probably remains the largest single.
The time of the gentlewoman has expired. The witness is allowed to answer the last question.
Minimums.
I'm sorry.
Time of the gentlewoman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Sessions, it's good to see you again.
Yes, sir.
I don't speak Russian, and I don't meet with Russians, and I don't really want to ask about those questions today, but I do have some very important questions.
Well, Congressman Issa, you said that, but I bet you have met with some Russian, and if you, in your lifetime, and taking those words at face value, somebody might accuse you of not being honest.
You're absolutely.
That's what they've done to me.
You're absolutely right, General Sessions, that that is the challenge, is that as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I meet with lots of ambassadors, and I don't want to try to remember everyone and everything that was discussed in what I thought was a pro forma meeting. But there are a couple of areas that are left over from the previous administration that I'd like to talk to you about. One of them is we sent Loretta Lynch, General Lynch, a letter related to sober homes and a predicament. And the predicament is fairly straightforward. If and her answer, to be honest, to Chairman Goodlatte and the rest of us was not satisfactory, and we've given your staff a copy of it. Essentially, sober living homes are nothing but boarding houses. They're required to provide no care whatsoever to the alcoholic or recovering drug abuser because that has to be done somewhere else, or they don't qualify as sober homes. And yet, currently, there is, in the Ninth Circuit, decisions that cause cities to be unable to regulate them in a way that would prevent people from simply buying houses in a row in a very prestigious neighborhood and turning them into these, if you will, sober living homes, which are, again, boarding houses with 15 or more people. Will you agree to work with us to try to find an appropriate way to align your enforcement of the Americans with Disability Act and your enforcement of the Fair Housing Act with the necessity for cities to be able to essentially regulate how many people live in a home?
Yes, I would be pleased to do that. These are important issues because a lot of money is being spent and some of it not wisely in these areas.
A lot of it is federal dollars being squandered to the benefit of people that are speculating. The second one is a trial court ruling in the Durante Nursery versus the Army Corps of Engineers case. Are you even familiar with this case?
I'm not.
Well, I'd like you to become familiar because during your administration, a assistant U.S. attorney on your behalf argued that the waters of the U.S., which is not a valid regulation delivered to Congress and eligible under CRA to be considered or rejected, continued to argue that that was law. Would you agree that your attorneys on your behalf should not argue regulations which have not been delivered to Congress and as a result are not eligible for CRA review?
Mr. Issa, I have now recalled the case. I didn't recall it by name. That matter was intensely reviewed by a new Assistant Attorney General for the acting, at least for the Environment and Natural Resources Division. After great consideration, we felt it was advised to me, and I approved going forward with that position in court. So I will take responsibility for it, but I got to tell you, we did look at it very hard.
But in general, you would agree that if a regulation is created or some other words of the executive branch, they don't have the weight of law unless they're delivered to Congress, so we have an opportunity to review them.
Discriminated for years in voting have more access to the ballot box.
We will absolutely, resolutely defend the right of all Americans to vote, including our African-American brothers and sisters. It cannot ever be suggested that people are blocked from voting. And we have done a number of things in the Department of Justice.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Attorney General. It's a fact, there have been studies to show that voter ID is more discriminatory in its effect on African Americans and Latinos than anything else. Will you stop in defending voter ID law cases?
No. The Supreme Court has approved voter ID if properly done. Other courts have too. It can be done in a discriminatory way, which is not proper and should not be approved. But I believe it's settled law that a properly handled and written voter ID law is
Let me
lawful.
suggest to sir, with all due respect, we come from the similar region. I think we have a greater responsibility than anybody else in this country to see to it that African Americans get a chance at the ballot. When they were discriminated against, they were slaves for 200+ years, they were under Jim Crow, they weren't allowed to vote, and they're still being discriminated against. And I would submit to you and ask you to look at voter ID laws, access to the ballot, election day voting, early voting, and other indices that will allow people to vote that have been stopped. Secondly, on marijuana, you said that you are basically doing the same as Holder and Lynch. I believe General Holder and General Lynch abided by congressional appropriations that limited the Justice Department in enforcing marijuana laws where states had passed laws on medical marijuana and others. Will you abide by congressional appropriations limitations on marijuana when it conflict with state laws?
I believe we're bound by that.
Thank you, sir. That's great. That's great. And I saw what you did on crack cocaine was good. It wasn't as good as it could have been. Your proposal was a 20-to-1 ratio. Mr. Durbin's was a 10-to-1 ratio. Y'all decided on 18-to-1. You were a good negotiator, but Mr. Durbin took what he could get. But it should have been 1-to-1. But you admitted in that hearing that it could discriminate against the disparity against African Americans and minorities, and you ought to look at that. I would just say that the net effect of that legislation was to significantly reduce the penalty one is subjected to for dealing with crack cocaine. Yes, sir, and that was good.
That may be a better analysis than the 18-to-1 or whatever it is. It's generally considered a more dangerous drug.
Marijuana is not as dangerous as heroin. Would you agree with that?
I think that's correct.
Well, thank you, sir. I would hope that in your enforcement that you would look at the limitations you've got. There's always an opportunity cost, and put your opportunity cost, your enforcement on crack, on cocaine, on meth, on opioids, and on heroin. Marijuana is the least bothersome of all. 28 states or 29 states in the District of Columbia have legalized it for medical purposes. 8 states in the District of Columbia for recreational purposes. Justice Brandeis famously said that the states are the laboratories of democracy. I would hope you'd look at marijuana and look at the states as laboratories of democracy and see how they've helped. In states where they've got medical marijuana, they have 25% less opioid use. It gives people a way to relieve pain without using opioids, which inevitably leads to death and crime. And so I would hope you take a look at that.
We will take a look at it, and we'll be looking at some rigorous analysis of the marijuana usage and how it plays out. I'm not as optimistic as you.
You'd said one time that good people don't smoke marijuana. Which of these people would you say are not good people?
Well, let me explain how that occurred.
All right.
Can I explain?
Quickly. John Kasich, is John Kasich a good person? George Pataki, Rick Santorum, Newt Gingrich, Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush, George Bush, Arnold Schwarzenegger, or Judge Clarence Thomas? Which of those are not good people?
Let me tell you how that came about, Congressman. So the question was, what do you do about drug use, the epidemic we're seeing in the country, and how you reverse it? Part of that is a cultural thing. I explained how when I became United States Attorney in 1981, and the drugs were being used widely, over a period of years, it became unfashionable, unpopular, and people were seen, and it was seen as such that good people didn't use marijuana. That was the context of that statement.
It might have affected my short-term memory. What years were those?
Chair recognizes the gentleman.
One last question, Alabama or Auburn?
The gentleman.
War Eagle.
Time has expired. No.
Although I went to law school,
Recognize the
I love Alabama.
Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Attorney General, did the FBI pay Christopher Steele?
Where am I?
Right here.
Yeah.
Did the FBI pay Christopher Steele, the author of the dossier?
Those are matters you'll have to direct to the, I think maybe the special counsel.
And why is that? I'm just asking if someone
Well, I'm not able to reveal internal investigatory matters here that's under the investigation of anybody, but particularly I think
this happened in the summer of 2016. We know the Clinton campaign, the Democrat National Committee paid through a law firm, Fusion GPS, to produce the dossier. We know the author was Christopher Steele. It's been reported that he was on the payroll of the FBI. I'm just wanting to know if, in fact, that is the case.
I'm not able to provide an answer to you.
Did the FBI present the dossier to the FISA court?
I'm not able to answer that.
Do you know if the FBI did the established process protocol in evaluating claims made in the dossier?
I'm not able to answer that.
On January 6, then FBI Director James Comey briefed President-elect Trump up in New York about the dossier. Shortly thereafter, the fact that that meeting took place and the subject of the meeting was the dossier was leaked to CNN. Do you know who leaked that information?
I do not.
Are you investigating who leaked that information?
That would be a matter within the investigatory powers of the special counsel.
You said you got a number of investigations going on, Mr. Attorney General, regarding leaks. Is that likely one of those that you're investigating?
I'm not able to reveal the existence of investigations or not.
Mr. Attorney General, I appreciate your service in the Senate. I appreciate your service at the Justice Department. Consider you a friend. And frankly, I appreciate yesterday's letter saying you were considering appointing a special counsel that you sent to us. But my concern is we sent you a letter 3.5 months ago asking for a second special counsel. And if you're now just considering it, what's it going to take to get a special counsel? We know that former FBI Director James Comey misled the American people in the summer of 2016 when he called the Clinton investigation a matter. It's obviously an investigation. We know FBI Director Comey was drafting an exoneration letter before the investigation was complete. We know Loretta Lynch, 1 day before the Benghazi report came out, 5 days before Secretary Clinton was scheduled to be interviewed by the FBI, met with former President Bill Clinton on a tarmac in Phoenix. We know after that meeting, when she was corresponding with public relations people at the Justice Department, she was using the name Elizabeth Carlisle. You know, as I've said before, it seems to me if you're just talking golf and grandkids, you can probably use your real name. We know that Mr. Comey publicized the investigation, and we know he made the final decision on whether to prosecute or not. And then when he gets fired, he leaks a government document through a friend to the New York Times. And what was his goal? To create momentum for a special counsel. And of course, it can't just be any special counsel. It's got to be Bob Mueller, his best friend, his predecessor, his mentor. The same Bob Mueller who was involved, we've now learned, in this whole investigation with the informant regarding Russian businesses wanting to do business in the uranium business here in the United States regarding the Uranium One deal. So I guess my main question is, what's it going to take, if all that, not to mention the dossier information, what's it going to take to actually get a special counsel?
It will take a factual basis that meets the standards of the appointment of a special counsel.
Is that analysis going on right now?
Well, it's in the manual of the Department of Justice about what's required. We've only had two. The first one was the Waco, Janet Reno, Senator Danforth, who took over that investigation as special counsel, and Mr. Mueller. Each of those are pretty special factual situations.
Let me ask it this way.
And we will use the proper standards, and that's what only thing I can tell you, Mr. Jordan.
Well, I appreciate
you can
that.
have your idea, but sometime we have to study what the facts are and to evaluate whether it meets the standard.
Well said. So let me ask you this. If in fact,
a special counsel.
Well, we know one fact. We know the Clinton campaign, the Democrat National Committee paid for, through the law firm, paid for the dossier. We know that happened. And it sure looks like the FBI was paying the author of that document, and it sure looks like a major political party was working with the federal government to then turn an opposition research document, the equivalent of some National Enquirer story, into an intelligence document, take that to the FISA court so that they could then get a warrant to spy on Americans associated with President Trump's campaign. That's what it looks like. And I'm asking you, doesn't that warrant, in addition to all the things we know about James Comey in 2016, doesn't that warrant naming a second special counsel, as 20 members of this committee wrote you 3.5 months ago asking you to do?
Well, Mr. Comey is no longer the director of the FBI.
Thank goodness.
We have an excellent man of integrity and ability in Chris Wray, and I think he's going to do an outstanding job, and I'm very happy about that.
He's not here today, Attorney General.
And I would say,
and I'm asking for a special counsel.
The time of the gentleman
and I would say
expired.
looks like is not enough basis to appoint a special counsel.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, General. You have led a remarkable and notable career over the last 42 years as an attorney in private practice, as the Attorney General of Alabama, then the U.S. Attorney in Alabama, later the U.S. Senator of Alabama, and now the Attorney General of the United States of America. And you made a professional judgment call when you recused yourself from the investigation of the Russian interference in the 2016 elections, and you've caught a lot of flack for that decision. What I want to know is, why did you recuse yourself?
Well, thank you very much. I told the Senate Judiciary Committee when I was confirmed that I would evaluate those matters. I would seek the counsel of the senior ethics advisor.
My question is, why did you recuse yourself?
I'll get that.
So I don't want you to filibuster.
Okay.
I
did do that. I evaluated that, and they showed me something I was not familiar with. One of the Code of Federal Regulations that says if you participate in a substantial role in a campaign, a Department of Justice employee should not participate in investigating that campaign.
Thank you.
I felt that was correct. It was not because I had any concern about anything I had done previously, but it was, to me, if I were not bound by that, I don't see how other people in the Department of Justice could be expected to follow the rules of the department either.
Well, thank you, sir. And after you recused yourself, you did participate in the firing of the FBI director who was leading the investigation into the Russian interference with the 2016 elections. Prior to Jim Comey's termination, were you contacted by the Donald Trump administration, anyone in that administration, Donald Trump himself or any of his political or campaign officials, about their quest to fire Jim Comey?
I am not able to and cannot reveal conversations with the President of the United States or his top advisors.
Let me ask you this question. With regards to the AT&T proposed acquisition of Time Warner, which owns CNN, it appears to be a vertical merger, much like the Comcast-NBC Universal merger that DOJ approved. But unlike its treatment of Comcast-NBC Universal, DOJ has suggested strongly that it will not approve the AT&T Time Warner merger unless Time Warner sells off CNN's parent company, Turner Broadcasting. It's well known that Your boss, President Trump, has great disdain for CNN, which he calls fake news. And what I want to know is, has the White House or any individual in or on behalf of the Trump administration or the Trump political team or campaign, excluding staff from FCC or DOJ, has anybody contacted you, your office, or your assigns regarding that AT&T Time Warner acquisition?
First, I would say that I don't accept and cannot accept the accuracy of that news report.
That blatantly ignore federal immigration laws, to combat criminal gangs that prey on our communities, to return to robust prosecutions of drug cases, to protect children from dangerous child predators, and to safeguard religious liberties that are enshrined in our Constitution. I'd like to go back for a second to sanctuary cities. I have been waiting 20 years for a president and an administration that would enforce current immigration laws. So happens that I introduced a bill in 1996 with Senator Al Simpson that, among other things, outlawed sanctuary cities. So the law is there, and I want to thank you for being willing to enforce that law, which will protect many innocent Americans from harm and perhaps save their lives. More generally, I'd like to ask you if you feel that there are any immigration laws, and if so, which ones, that need to be better enforced.
There absolutely are, and maybe even some improved. I know you've worked on that, and the chairman has worked on that with some excellent legislation. I totally believe that the professional legislation I know the chairman has worked on and you've worked on would be tremendously helpful. We've got to deal with numbers. And so when you create a mechanism by which we had 5,000 people in 2005 who claimed a credible fear. Last year, it was 95,000. This is creating hearings and backlogs that were never intended to be part of the system. Did not happen before. And so there's so many things out there that burden our law enforcement officers, make it more difficult, more expensive, more lengthy to complete these things. We've just got to make up our mind. We've got to make up our mind, do we want a lawful system of immigration that serves the national interest, or do we want open borders and we're not going to enforce it? Thank you for your leadership, Mr. Smith. I know you'll be leaving this body also, and I've enjoyed so much the honor of working with you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Attorney General. I'm not going to ask any questions, and I'm going to end with that, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back. Thank you.
The chair thanks the gentleman. We're going to take a break, Attorney General Sessions, so the committee will stand in recess for 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, so you were watching there the House Judiciary Committee questioning Jeff Sessions Attorney General Jeff Sessions on a number of different items, really a wide-ranging questioning there. They're breaking for lunch for a moment. Let's bring in, let's see, we have Ileana Johnson is standing behind. She's a national political reporter with Politico, and she joins us now. Ileana, what was your takeaway there? They really drilled down on a lot of different details, and one of the funniest exchanges, I guess, was when Darrell Issa said, I know I've never spoken Russian or had any meetings with Russia, and Attorney General Sessions said very quickly, you might want to think before you say something like that, because it could come back to haunt you. Basically, there's probably something that you're not thinking about right now, and you'll be accused of lying like I was. He was pretty spicy at parts there.
He was. That really speaks to, I think, him trying to explain what his defense is on all of this. You saw the Attorney General really be challenged about his consistent responses, which is that he doesn't recall or he doesn't remember, and he has previously told Senate committees that he simply doesn't recall any interaction with any Russians during the campaign or being told about any interaction with any Russian officials during the campaign. And now, of course, we've subsequently learned said that there was a Trump campaign official, George Papadopoulos, who had a significant amount of interaction with Russian officials. So he was really pressed about that, particularly by Democrats. And he's saying he simply didn't recall it, that his previous testimony remains truthful. So Darrell Issa there was really doing him a solid, and they had a friendly exchange where he was saying it's completely normal not to remember this, that in the course of work as a senator, particularly on an intelligence or foreign affairs committee, you have lots of interaction with foreign officials that you wouldn't necessarily remember.
I mean, in particular with regard to Papadopoulos, what he said was, if I had recalled that encounter at the moment, I would have told you that I pushed back on him, you know, and told him he does not represent the campaign. He does not represent anyone in this meeting, you know, and he said that my answer, I would have been very forthright, because what I did in that exchange was tell him no. So how did you think that played?
I think that played well and spoke to, you know, it wasn't only Jeff Sessions who told Papadopoulos no, it was even Paul Manafort, who's now been indicted for some of his inappropriate contact with foreign officials and his lack of disclosure about that, who actually told the same campaign official, George Papadopoulos, no, that President, or at that time, candidate Trump will not meet with Vladimir Putin. So this official who had the most contact that we know of right now with Russian officials was told no by multiple senior level advisors on the Trump campaign. The other thing I thought was interesting was that Jeff Sessions really characterized this Foreign Policy Advisory Committee as a chaotic mess. And he essentially said this thing was completely disorganized and ineffective. And, you know, that's really the reason why it really was informal and a total mess.
We have to jump in here because President Trump is on his way back to the United States after a lengthy trip to Asia. He is on board Air Force One and has just spoken with members of the press aboard Air Force One. One of the topics that came up were the 3 UCLA basketball players who were detained in China after reports of shoplifting there. The president may have played a role in freeing those members of the basketball team who are coming back to the U.S. President Trump, again, on his way back to the White House after a nearly 2-week trip to Asia. We met with numerous foreign leaders, and we're getting that tape playback now.
We made a lot of great friends. So we look forward to going back, but we really enjoyed it. We really enjoyed it.
We left a little early or something. What happened?
No, we had a lunch, and I was able to make my final remarks at the lunch.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
We didn't hear that. Can you kind of summarize?
Give them to you. Oh, the lunch was great. Everybody was there. They were delayed 3 hours, as you probably heard. There was a delay for some reason, but we had a lunch, and they let me make my opening, my ending remarks at the lunch. So that was really good. So we're leaving pretty much on time, I think, right? How's that? Pretty much on time?
Yeah, a little early.
Kept us pretty much on time.
Are you proud of the trip?
Very proud of it from a standpoint of security and safety, military, very proud, and trade. You will see numbers that you won't believe over the years. Over a period of years, they will be treating us much differently than they have in the past. People were taking advantage, countries were taking advantage of the United States, more than just this region, but the world. And those days are over. We're going to be fair. We're going to be reciprocal. As I said in my remarks before, we will be reciprocal, meaning if they're doing it, we're doing it. And that's the way it's going to be.
What's one thing that you feel like you accomplished that you got done that you can tell the American people about?
Well, I think we made a lot of progress just in terms of relationship. We actually sold $300 million worth of equipment and other things. And I think that number is going to be quadrupled very quickly. So that's over $1 trillion worth of stuff. I think we have done a really fantastic job. It's been a great trip. It's also been really good in terms of North Korea and getting everybody together. I think their acts are all together. China has been excellent. Japan and South Korea have been excellent. I think that's a very important part of the trip. And the other important part to me was trade and relationship. The Philippines is an unbelievably important military location because if you speak to the admirals and you speak to the generals, that's a perfect spot. And as you know, we had no relationship for a long period of time in the Philippines, and now we have a very good relationship there. We're back with the Philippines, so strategically we have a very important location, maybe the most important strategic location in that area. So it's good. We had a great time. I hope you guys are all okay. You all look well. Go to sleep for a little while, and we'll be around. We'll talk to you later. The basketball players, by the way, I know a lot of people are asking. I will tell you, when I heard about it 2 days ago, I had a great conversation with President Xi. What they did was unfortunate. You know, you're talking about very long prison sentences. They do not play games. He was terrific, and they're working on it right now, and hopefully everything's going to work out. And I know they're very grateful because they were told exactly what happened. That's a very rough situation with what happened to them. And I was with him. Yes, he is, and he's been terrific. President Xi has been terrific on that subject, but that was not a good subject. That was not something that should have happened. Okay, folks, go rest.
Do you expect to see them coming home soon?
I hope so.
Can you say what you might announce on Thursday or Wednesday at the White House?
Well, I think we're going to go into details of what I said.
President Trump on board Air Force One, saying he's very proud of his trip to Asia, confirming that he did play a role in getting those 3 UCLA basketball players freed from custody in China, and also saying he's proud of the trade deals that he's managed to negotiate, that the days of the U.S. being taken advantage of with its trade partners, those days are over. And I just want to weigh in real quick, Melissa, on the hearings. It seemed to me that a lot of these members of Congress were more interested in hearing their questions than hearing the answers from the Attorney General.
That's so unusual. That's so unusual. No, that's true. I mean, let's bring Ileana back in because we have just another minute to talk about it. And along those lines, you really did hear Jim Jordan talking about the FBI and did they pay to have that dossier made. Ileana, are you still with us?
I'm here.
And we heard the response to that was, I can't really talk about it. I'm not able to answer that question, was the exact quote that came from Attorney General Sessions. Where do you think that goes?
You know, one of the interesting things about Jeff Sessions' tenure at the Justice Department has been that Republicans are as frustrated with him as Democrats are. He's really driven Republicans, including President Trump, with whom his relationship is really cooled. He's frustrated them greatly because they want to see aggressive investigations against Democrats. Jim Jordan wants to know what's happening in terms of any sort of FBI or Department of Justice investigation into the Steele dossier. They want investigations against Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration, and they're not really seeing those so far. Today, we just saw the very beginning with Sessions' announcement into a potential investigation against the Clinton Foundation, but Republicans really have been as frustrated with what they thought would be a really aggressive Sessions Justice Department, haven't quite gotten that, and that was interesting and certainly on display today.
Well, he certainly seems comfortable, Ileana, in that setting. I mean, he's been in a number of these already now, being grilled by members of Congress and the Senate, so how do you think he handled it?
Yeah, he certainly seems cool under fire, and I think it's helpful that the thing that these House members are most interested in hearing about, which is the Russia investigation, he can't talk about. That's helpful to him.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks to everyone. Thank you for joining us. Outnumbered starts right now.
Fox News alert, Attorney General Sessions getting grilled on Capitol Hill today. The House Judiciary Committee minutes ago taking a break from testimony. When they return, we will take you back there live. The committee wants Sessions to clarify what he knew about any possible contacts between members of the Trump campaign and Russian officials. Today's hearing comes after new details emerged that contradicted statements Sessions made in the past under oath. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith, and here today, Harris Faulkner, Republican strategist and Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, former national security staffer under Presidents Bush and Obama, Jillian Turner, and today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, National Review's senior editor and Fox News contributor Jonah Goldberg. He is outnumbered, and we're so glad that we actually made it to air here because the hearing could come back on soon, and we'll go to that live, but a little break here. What do you think so far?
I think Sessions, first of all, it's great to be here. Lovely new studio. I feel like it should be like an MTV Music Award thing. But I think Sessions is always, he always keeps his cool. And And he does benefit, as Eliana was saying in the last hour, he benefits enormously by the fact that he literally can't talk about a lot of the things that would get him in the most trouble. I don't mean trouble like self-incriminating. I just mean that would move the news cycle, get Democrats all worked up. He just says, look, I can't talk about it.
All right. Well, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, he is back on the hot seat today. House Judiciary Committee members are asking him to clarify statements he made in the past about Russia after new details came out. Today's testimony is the fourth time Sessions has been questioned on Trump's campaign's possible contacts with Russia. In the past, Sessions denied.
Listening to the testimony, he remembered some things and not others. Why don't you just say you don't remember? Because I think when you cherry pick it like that, it gives an opening for Democrats to say, well, why do you remember some things? What was...
On May 9th, the president fired Comey. On May 11th, he went on television and announced that he fired Comey because of, and I quote again, the Russia thing with Trump and Russia, close quote. General Sessions, do you think it would be reasonable for the members of this committee to conclude that the president, by first interfering in one investigation and then interfering in an investigation into himself, committed obstruction of justice?
I don't believe that's a fair conclusion, and but it's a matter that I guess would be in the breast of the special counsel. The obstruction of justice being any, among other definitions, the most popular one in statute, any communication that endeavors to influence, obstruct, or impede the due administration of justice. That's exactly what the president did in both of those cases. And in spite of, moving on to the special counsel that you brought up, in spite of efforts, bipartisan efforts to protect the special counsel, Mr. Mueller, the Republican leadership in this committee have refused to take action to ensure that he's protected. Do you believe that the president has the legal authority to fire Special Counsel Mueller? I'm not able to express an opinion on that at this
Can he
point.
fire members of the special counsel's team?
I'm not able to.
General Sessions, do you believe that the president should have the authority to be able to block investigations into his own campaign?
Investigations have to be conducted by the appropriate law enforcement officers without fear and favor, without politics or bias.
Right, and without fear of being dismissed by the president in order to block that investigation, because again, that would certainly today that there is nothing more important than the Constitution. And while members of this committee and the majority may choose to abdicate their responsibility with regard to these very important matters, you cannot. And the interference, what you've told us today in just this exchange, what we should all be concerned about is another Saturday Night Massacre if you can't tell us that the president shouldn't fire or can't